Oh, do you want the mics on? Or
yeah, we need the mics for the webcast.
For the webcast. Right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this morning's quarterly meeting of licensing. I just better go through some safety rules. If we hear the fire alarm, please follow the green signs that take us to the car park outside opposite the police station. Could everyone please make sure their mobile phones are either switched off or put on silence? And I think the first thing we should do now is go to... Oh, is there any apologies?
Yeah, apologies for absence from Councillor Jones and Councillor Seaborn.
Thank you. Are there any declarations of interest of anyone for this morning's business?
Chair, my advice is that I've looked at the agenda and there's nothing that I'm aware of the members need to declare.
Thank you, Delph. So we'll move on to item agenda 3, which is minutes of the previous meeting, pages 5 to 8. We'll just go through them for clarity. Page 5, 6, 7, and 8. Could anyone move that this is a true record, please? Anyone here? It wasn't you. All good. Yeah. Thank you. Just go back to any matters arising on page 5, 6, 7, and 8. If there's no matters arising, we'll go to item agenda 4, which is page 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15. We just go through for any matters raising again. Page 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Could someone move a true record, please?
It goes up to page 48, it does.
Oh, it goes up to page 48,
yeah,
sorry.
It's the licensing
Oh, it's the
hearing.
licensing hearing.
Yeah.
All right. So then we go to page 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23. Is all in the same?
Yeah, it is, yeah. It's all
25,
licensing hearings.
26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40, 41, 42, 43, 44, and 45. Could someone move all those minutes, please? Moved. Any matters of arising?
Councillor Kemp.
Oh, sorry.
Yes, I can only approve the panels I was on, if you like, at the end of the day. And I know that there's been a selection of councillors on different panels, and so I can approve the minutes associated with the panels that I was represented on.
That's fine. That must be bills. Yeah, everybody's mixed. Right. Do we need to go through all that again?
No, that should be fine.
That should be fine. Okay.
Councillor Davis.
Beg your pardon?
You want to go from page 1 to again?
No, thanks. No. So it's item agenda 5 now.
Yeah, on the screen.
The item agenda 5 is the Village Green application. So how many? Tim going to come in on that? Could Tim please come in on the rest to introduce her, Tim?
Yes, I will do. Thank you, Chair. Members, this matter is the Village Green application, and you'll no doubt be familiar with the background because of the previous reports that you've come before committee. And in summary, the position is this: is that this committee decided some while ago that the application would be dealt with by a subcommittee, and the subcommittee, it was subsequently decided, would consist of 6 members. In order to comply with the political balance requirements under the relevant regulations, the committee needs to consist of 4 Labour members, 1 independent member and 1 Conservative member, and the relevant members to take up that allocation, if you like, were nominated on the 17th of July 2014. One of the Labour members who was nominated on that occasion was Councillor Ashley. He's now left the Licensing Committee, and therefore it's necessary now for this committee to nominate another member from the Labour group to take up the relevant political allocation that was taken up by Councillor Ashley on the subcommittee. And the purpose of this report, therefore, is simply that, is to ask that this committee please nominate an additional member from the Labour group who can sit on the Village Green subcommittee. And I believe that the Labour members may have somebody in mind for that.
Do any recommendations for anyone to come on the committee?
I'll be honest, already.
No, you're not.
No, you. Could we have a recommendation from someone that Giles takes up position? Right. Thank you. So we've got Giles. Tim, thanks.
Thank you, Chair. So Councillor Giles Davis is nominated to the subcommittee, and I'm obliged for that. And just to remind those members who are on the subcommittee that the subcommittee will be sitting today at 12:30 in Committee Room 3, when I'm hopeful we can reach a decision on the application, and there's a report to the subcommittee relevant to that. So it's just to remind members of that it's in Committee Room 3 at 12:30. Thank you, Chair.
Tim, we now move on to agenda item 6, which is the quarterly update on all licensing matters. And could I ask Steve Vendel if he'll give us his report, please?
Thank you, Chair. This is the report for the quarter, for the months of October, November and December of 2014. And the recommendation is that the committee note and comment on the contents of this report, that the committee note the delegated decisions, that the committee approve the commencement of the consultation of the Licensing Act 2003 policy, which is attached to Appendix A, and that the committee note the activity report for the second quarter of 2014-15. During the period, under the Licensing Act, officers have inspected 8 premises and investigated 11 issues. As you can see, the details are there in paragraphs 5.1 onwards, or section 5.1 onwards. There's nothing particularly outstanding in that particular section for this period. With regards to inspections, etc., we did have an issue with the Christmas market in Cumberland Shopping, which was resolved. There were a couple of other things. There's nothing really has happened over the Christmas period which has raised any particular concerns. The biggest issue with it for us in that period was suspension notices we had to issue for failure to pay annual fees. I think there was 2 of us were more or less completely tied up for nearly a month running around after premises who didn't pay annual fees. However, unlike previous years, it gets resolved very quickly because we're in a position where those that will pay have paid, because otherwise their licence is suspended. There are other issues of premises which are closed, which will not will not be an issue. But as you can see, 51 premises had to be visited because they didn't pay their annual fee in November. November is always the busiest month for that because that's the month when most of the licences are issued. So therefore their anniversary falls in that month on the 25th of November, which is the commencement of the Licensing Act 2003 back in 2005. There were a number of representations on 518 now. There have been a number of representations to licensing applications. Most of them were representations to two separate applications to a restaurant in Fairwater, the Spice Inn. You've already seen the minutes of one of the meetings, which was held by the licensing panel, which was at agenda item 3, I think. Agenda item 4, where the panel refused to grant the licence. Following that refusal to grant the licence, the applicant decided not to appeal but to submit a different application. Although that application was held in this quarter, i.e. the beginning of 2015, because it all flows, it's common sense to mention that at that hearing the licence was actually granted, although we did have another 22 representations to that application. So the 60 representations is a very high number, but every representation is counted as an individual, although it's all against one premises. So you can see that took up quite a considerable amount of time over the period leading up to Christmas. We've also had a new nightclub open in Cwmbran called Play. Is at Cwmbran Complex. There were representations with regards to that from the police and environmental health. They were agreed and the licence was granted on delegated authority. The other was an application to vary a club premises certificate at Pilks and New Inn, and the representation was purely to tidy up conditions. Again, they were agreed, and the licence was granted in delegated authority. And there were also 3 temporary event notices rejected in that period because they didn't comply with the rules on the notification period. It's quite unusual for us to reject temporary event notices, but we seem to have an influx coming in December, of which we're exceeding their limitations. The Licensing Act policy is now ready to go out to consultation. I did mention it at the last committee, and the committee agreed to approve it to go out. But as it hasn't actually gone out yet, I've now attached it to this committee report so that all members of the committee can see the draft policy which is ready to go out. And that is attached to Appendix A. And I'm asking the committee if they would approve the commencement of the consultation. And that's everything as far as the Licensing Act 2003 is concerned. Are there any questions from any members before we move on to Hackney Carriage and Private Hire Licensing?
In regarding 5.1.7, if you say that you and your team are spending 1 month, if you like, chasing up fees, if you like, are fees paid electronically, or because that's an awful lot of resource time, if you like, in just chasing up people who haven't paid, if you like, surely there must be simpler ways to get the fees in.
Right. The issue we have, we send out invoices much like we do for the council tax for every year to premises that have to pay the annual fee, and they're spread throughout the year. But the bulk of them happen to just come in November because that's when most licences were issued for the first time. In the past, there have been some chasing, and it's all come down to our revenues department doing it through their system and taking people to court. But 2 years ago, the government brought in new legislation because every council was suffering from non-payment of annual fee and not being able to affect the licences if they didn't pay the fee. The government changed the legislation to allow officers, and it has to be officers, it can't be anyone else in the council, to actually suspend a premises licence if the annual fee is not paid. That means that a pub that doesn't pay its annual fee has to stop selling alcohol, basically. This then puts a bit of pressure on. So the only way we can do this is for officers to go out and physically serve a suspension notice on the pub. That's why we have to visit. We can't do it any other way. We can't do it all by letter or whatever. But because we're doing this all year round, and every report you'll see there are a few in there, because since the Licensing Act has come in, some premises have got different commencement dates of licences. But we are stuck with this November one, which is always going to be our bulk one. In previous years, we spent a lot more time than this chasing around because we didn't have the power of the legislation to allow us to suspend licences. Now we have the power of the legislation. It actually reduces our workload, believe it or not. But it all comes in one big lump in November, December really, because it's the 24th of November that most of these have to be paid. So we're then doing the suspensions through the month of beginning of December. So we're comfortable with it. I know what you're saying, but we are comfortable with it because it is otherwise we just don't get this money in.
Do we, though, try and encourage, if you like, electronic payments, if you like a standing order or the direct debits, if you like, for these?
Yeah, direct debits are available to them on an annual basis. Most of them, we have got a few that pay by direct debit because they've been caught out a couple of times, but many don't, and we get new ones coming along. And every time the invoice is sent out by our revenues department, they are offered to pay by direct debit. But it's their choice at the end of the day, it's not ours. Okay. Anything else on Licensing Act before I go on to Hackney Carriage and Private Hire? Because there's quite a lot in Hackney Carriage and Private Hire this month. As you can see, well, the first paragraphs I've noted about the inspections. And some of the complaints that we've had about private hire vehicles running without licences. We're at the moment we haven't managed to discover who they are and what they're doing. So until we get further information, it's very difficult for us to take any positive action. And as you would have noticed from the minutes, which were, there were quite a lot of panel hearings in this quarter. We had what I would call a sort of a desert of panel hearings through for about a 12-month, but all of a sudden, like buses, they came all at once. And we have had quite a few, and we've had a number in this period. So one of the panel hearings, a licence was granted by the panel. However, it was then discovered that we had made a mistake on administration in the licensing team, that we hadn't noticed that his driving licence hadn't been valid for, he hadn't had a full driving licence for 12 months prior, because it's a matter in the legislation that all drivers of Hackney carriages, we cannot issue a licence to anyone unless they've held a full driving licence for a 12-month period. And that's a full driving licence, not just passed their test. And we missed it on the application. So that person came to panel, he was granted. It was the operator that actually rang us and said, my insurance company won't insure him because he's not licensed, his licence isn't right. I know we've double checked, it's unusual for us, but we actually missed it on this one. So we've had to withdraw that licence from him with the caveat that as soon as his licence, he's had it for 6 months at that point, and I think when it comes up to about May, he will be able to come back to us and he will get the licence straight away at that point. But we cannot issue it at the moment because it would be illegal for us to do so. It was a shame, but he's still keen to carry on. We have been in contact with him, and well, let's say the insurance companies wouldn't touch him. So that's how it came about. We've also had a number of complaints about private hire vehicles applying for hire on taxi ranks. And you'll notice we've sent a newsletter out, which is attached to Appendix B, which is highlighting a recent court case that we were successful with a prosecution, which I will mention when I get to prosecutions and appeals. We've also had another complaint. A driver pulled away before the lady passenger was in the car, and she ended up going flying. This is one of those things that obviously you're keen to get her to her destination on time, maybe, but whatever happened, obviously that driver had to be spoken to. It's not something that we get very often, and that driver was not someone that comes to our attention as being normally causing problems, but obviously this lady was quite shocked by it all, and we had to deal with that complaint. We do have this happen occasionally with driving incidents. They're bound to happen. They do so many miles that sometimes they lose concentration at some point, but this is unusual to drive off before the passenger is actually in the car, because that means the money's not in the car either for them to pay. But a couple of complaints about operators charging excessive fares and refusing to pick up a client. They were investigated but could not be taken any further. And in that period, we've had a couple of police operations which have allowed us to do a few vehicle inspections. And as you can see, we've inspected 26 vehicles, and out of those 14 defects were found in the period. As you can see, the 6th of December, there was 18 vehicles checked and identified the following issues, the issues that are on there. Most of them are of a minor nature, but one vehicle where they had tyres was actually suspended for a period until that was put right, so the vehicle was actually taken off the road. We've had a number of complaints in this period where the complainants didn't pursue the complaint. They come to us, they ring us up and say, yeah, I want to make a complaint about so-and-so, I'm not happy, but they wouldn't actually then follow it up with the information we require to actually carry on. So we've actually done a lot of running around for people who don't pursue their complaints. This is becoming more prevalent lately. It seems people are quite happy to ring us up and say this issue has happened. It's passed to an officer to investigate. When the officer rings them back and says, oh, I'm not getting involved in anything. Oh, no, I don't want to take it any further. I just wanted you to know. Well, that's just not good enough. We can't take it any further. And also at Appendix C, you'll see the 12-month report for the first year of the knowledge test at Torvine training. That's attached to Appendix C. It's been quite successful in our view. It has worked very well. We've seemed to have got this running fairly well, to the extent now where I've actually got Blaen and Gwent Council and Caerphilly Council in conversation with Torvine training because they want to use it as well. So it's going down, is being seen as a positive way forward for all councils, and we've been the pioneers of that, if you like, here, which I'm quite proud of. As you can see, the figures for the year on there, and like I say, we're still having new applicants coming in. They have reduced, because a lot of them are seeing this and saying there's no way I can pass this and going away. With that then, we're not having to do the work on administering them. That's everything with regards to taxi licensing. Any questions on that before we move on to gambling?
Councillor Giles Davis.
Yeah, I've passed a couple of taxis over the last couple of weeks, and I've noticed the driver smoking with the window down, but there's been no passenger. What's the actual ruling on that situation?
If we see them, they would be prosecuted. They would have a fixed penalty notice. They're not allowed to smoke in a licensed vehicle. The licensed vehicle is designated as a premises under the Health Act, and whether there's a passenger or not, they're not allowed to smoke in the vehicle. We have actually prosecuted quite a few drivers for this, or when I say prosecuted, we've issued fixed penalties. Some of them have failed to pay that, and they've ended up going to court. But we do issue fixed penalties if we see them.
Well, thanks. I've just passed several the last couple of weeks on the school run, and they've dropped the kids off, and then they spark up straight away and they're off.
Yeah, if you tell me the location where it normally happens, we'd be quite happy to sit there and watch them.
Councillor Kemp.
Thank you. In regard to 5.2.7, it states that a total of 26 vehicles were inspected. What percentage is that of the total number of Hackney and private hire carriages currently on the road, approximately, if you like?
Well, I'm not going to try and do maths to make it a percentage, but I can tell you we've got just in the region of 350 vehicles on the road. So it's quite a low percentage, unfortunately. We'll come on to it when we come to the performance. We've had to make a decision, which I've discussed at the last couple of committee meetings, about what we do and where we push our priorities. When a lot of the vehicles we've inspected in the past have been almost by appointment, so they know that we're going to inspect them. We very seldom find anything wrong with those vehicles because we haven't got the power to go out and stop vehicles on our own on the side of the road and do them ad hoc. The only ones we can check ad hoc are the ones on the taxi ranks, and they know we can do it, and they keep themselves tidy 99% of the time. The private hire vehicles, where they're out and about running around, the only way you can check them ad hoc is by stopping them. And the only way we can do that is with the cooperation of the police, because they're the only ones who have the power to stop a vehicle at the moment. There is talk of giving us powers, but the logistics of that could be quite difficult. So the 26 we inspected are ad hoc, but we've got 14 defects out of within 26 vehicles. That's quite a high percentage of defects. If we could actually stop more vehicles ad hoc when they're not expecting it, I'm sure we would find more defects. But the only way we can do it at the moment is with the cooperation of the police. Now, the police are still good to us. They still work with us. They're still keen to work with us. Some of the issues we haven't had the resources to put with the police when they've asked for us. Because as you know, we've talked about our resource issues quite considerably. But what I've said to the team is, which I'll go on to, is that as far as police operations are concerned, that is a priority, that is a high risk. We will do those inspections. If the police, because we get results, the normal walking around the taxi rank and visiting cars at their depots is not turning up any defects, or not turning up as many issues. So it is not something I can put on the high risk. So I'm looking at what's actually achieving something rather than just doing something for the sake of it. And that's how we will be working in future.
If we can turn to Appendix C, which is the knowledge, if you like, certainly in the January, February, March, if you like, months, if like there's an awful lot of people that have been booked in but haven't taken the actual test. Is there a fee to the test as such, or are we losing money again for the people who don't turn up, if you like?
Right. There is a fee for the test, but they only pay when they actually turn up for the test. Speaking to Torvine Training recently, they're just about breaking even on what they're doing, so we're not losing money on it. We're not making money either, but we're not losing money. What's happening is that they're sending out the information packs, so the people are ringing them, so they're sending out the information pack. When they see the information pack and the details of what they're going to have to do to pass the test, a lot of them just say, oh, end of. They're not coming back in. So they would probably, I would suspect, that they would probably fail the test anyway. So the ones that are coming through are the ones that think they can pass, and most do. We've got very few failures that haven't passed on resits, which I think it means that they're just deciding they've got no chance of passing and not taking the test.
And so, are they booked in automatically as soon as they get the pack? Then? No,
they're not. They get the pack, and then it's up to them to book in after that. So they will only book in once they've had the pack and had a chance to look through it and do some work to prepare for the test.
So then the fact that if we have a look at the Februaries, if like there's a total of 15 booked in and only one attended, if like.
Yes, that's correct. They actually booked in. Sorry, that's. Yeah, I think what happens is they do book in straight away, but then they say only 3 attend. But they say that it is still covering their costs.
I'm just wondering if there's a better way of recording better figures, knowing that, if you like, they've after they've received the information, then they book in, and so as a consequence, if you like, they wouldn't have to pay the fee, and in addition, the stats would look more favourable.
Yeah, they don't pay the fee unless they actually attend. Yeah, so the fee is only paid if they attend. So the 10 in February who didn't turn up didn't pay the fee. All right. One of the conditions, when they turn up, the first thing that they do is they pay the fee, they check identity documents to make sure that the person sitting the test is the person that they've got on the list, and they make copies of those identity documents, so usually the photo card, driving licence, etc. Questions on taxi licensing? Sorry. Okay. Next one on 5.3 is just a note about an ongoing issue we have with illegal betting in pubs. In fact, I had a discussion with the Gambling Commission on this yesterday. It is a problem nationwide. It's very difficult to enforce. It's very difficult to actually find the information to take any positive action. But we have got an issue where one of our licensed bookmakers is saying that all their business is going to the pub down the road, and they're losing business from it. And they're obviously paying us the fees for their licence, and they're hoping we can do something about it. But the bottom line is when we say, OK, then give us a statement of evidence or give us information that we can take action on, or we don't want to do that for fear of reprisals. So there's a double-edged sword there. They want us to do something, but they don't want to put themselves in a position. Because they've alleged that they've had damage done to their premises because all these racing channels come through on satellite dishes, and they reckon they had all the wires cut on their racing satellite dishes. So, there's all this sort of thing, because as soon as their heads are poked above the water. So they want something done. They want the illegal betting stopped, which we do as well. But actually doing it, I've had meetings with the police, I've had meetings with the Gambling Commission, and it's a nationwide issue. Betting in pubs is illegal. It's not allowed under any circumstances. And if someone's caught, there's quite hefty penalties involved. But the actual logistics of catching them is very, very difficult. And that's I wanted to highlight it here because it's something which might come up again in another format, if you like. I mentioned about smoking. We mentioned smoking just now in the taxis, but we haven't had anything in this period that we've dealt with, no complaints and no issues with no prosecution. So we haven't found anybody or seen anybody. Street trading, we've had 6 complaints and investigations in this quarter. We had a little spate just before Christmas of people setting up on the side of the road with Christmas trees and wooden reindeer and Santa Clauses and things like that, which we were once brought to our attention, we had to go and deal with. We stopped 2. The third one, I think by the time we were told about it, was probably too close to Christmas and they'd stopped anyway. But it's not something that we take as a high priority, but if we get a complaint, then we've got to deal with it, because other people have asked to trade in certain locations, and particularly one of them was on what we call a prohibited road. It was up at Treherbert Road by the crematorium. And of course that is prohibited because of the crematorium and because of what it is, and they set themselves up there. So we had to be firm on that one, because even if they could get consent at that late stage, which they couldn't, they wouldn't have got it for that location. We've got a couple of other issues with regards to street trading. As you can see, we've got some changes that have taken place, vehicle changes that have taken place without notification, and we're chasing up on that. Unfortunately, the owner of that vehicle is currently out of the country, and it's taking a lot longer than we expected. No issues reported in charity collections in this quarter. And scrap metal, we had an application for a licence where the police made an objection, and that was considered on delegated authority. And although it's not on this, it says it will be considered. It was actually considered in this quarter, i.e. a couple of weeks ago, and the licence was granted, despite the police objection. It's quite a difficult one. I know this committee has got no remit with regards to scrap metal because it's an executive function, not a council function. But I do report it, and this is very difficult because the police had good reasons for why they put their objection in on this person, but unfortunately they didn't comply with what the Act and what's set out by the Home Office that we could consider. So they were putting in objections about a criminal history for this individual, but they weren't the offences which are listed in the Act, because they specify particular offences in the Act. The Act is quite restrictive in actual fact. We started doing some inspections on scrap metal, and we started doing some compliance, and in fact there are some prosecutions pending. I've actually brought one prosecution file up this morning for a scrap metal dealer with regards to keeping of records and producing records, so there are prosecutions coming, and that's sort of leading in now to the next section on 5.8. Any questions on anything that I've covered so far before we go into prosecutions and appeals? Because as you can see, there's quite a lot in this bit. Yeah. Okay, the last committee I mentioned an investigation into removal of signs. That investigation is finished, and the offender, Mr. Bellhouse, as you can see, we've mentioned the name now, has been cautioned for the offence and received what they call now under the Criminal Law Act as a simple caution. So it's not just being told off, it is actually a written caution that he's had to sign. And I've mentioned just now about the newsletter and the prosecution in court. Beverly Walker was tried for the offence of applying for hire in Cumbrian Railway Station taxi rank. Took place on the 12th of December, and Mrs. Walker pleaded not guilty, defended herself. She was convicted and as you can see, fined quite heavily in actual fact. We were quite surprised at the level of the fine. £1,000 for the offence in order to pay a contribution of cost of £1,160 and a £100 victim surcharge. So you see that when...
Chair, are we okay mentioning names, knowing that it's been in webcast? Like...
It's open information. It was a magistrate's court hearing. It could have been in the press. That's why at this stage now I will. I'm only prepared to do it once it's concluded. I would have, in the past, they would have been anonymised. Yeah. Excuse me. We've been leading up to this one for quite some considerable time with the Administrative Court, High Court hearing, with regards to our appeal against the decision of the magistrates. I'm not going to read all of this out. You can read this for yourselves in the report. But as you can see, the High Court found in our favour. Quite a good judgment. I still haven't had seen the transcript of the judgment, but once we get that, I will circulate among members. So I think there's quite an interesting format and quite interesting on all the circumstances. I know it's going to be useful to licensing officers across the county, across the UK. His Lordship also awarded £500 of contribution towards costs. As you can imagine, our costs were much higher than that. In fact, they were somewhere in the region of £3,500 our cost to take this to the court. But it was necessary because it was a matter of principle, not so much the fact that we wanted to make sure Mr. Stubbs got prosecuted. It was the fact that the principle of what the magistrates had done was totally wrong in law, and we had to make it. We had to resolve that. The magistrates didn't defend the case at all. The magistrate's clerk was sat in the back of the court, but they didn't defend the case at all. They had already accepted they got it wrong. But we had to go through this process in order to make it a legal thing. We've got the order from the court now, signed by His Lordship. We've instructed the magistrates to have a look now, and all they've got to do is sentence, because they can't hear it again now. All they've got to do is sentence. Mr. Stubbs, incidentally, is now a legal street trader. He has now got a licence. The judicial review is on a different process. The judicial review would be if there was some unreasonableness involved in the decision, i.e. this is why you claim prejudicial interest when you're on your meetings and panels here. If you've got a prejudicial interest, you know a person that's sitting before you, then that could be a matter for judicial review. Where the magistrates just purely got it wrong on a point of law, then we'd go for what they call an administrative hearing, which is what this is. This is what they call an administrative hearing in order to put the point of law right. And then that overturns the magistrates. It may not have done, of course. We could have lost. But it will overturn the magistrate's decision. And that's what this is doing. All right. So judicial review is for a different problem, but it's still go to the High Court, yes, and still very expensive. As I say, the transcript of the case is not available yet. Right. It says there that the application is currently being considered, but I can tell you now that that licence was signed this month, so he is now licensed. The decision of the licensing panel, 584 on page 56, with regards to Mr. Nicky James. I'm naming the name now, although it was anonymised in the minutes earlier. So the minutes were actually a part of this file, because it's now an open hearing in the court. He's been to court, again, in the same circumstances. He has appealed against the decision of the licensing panel to suspend him for 6 months, which means, of course, that in the meantime, he is continuing to drive. He has not served that suspension yet. You can see the dates laid out there. We have now got the skeleton argument from his defence team, or his legal team. Justine and I are going to be working on a response to that skeleton argument next week, which we have to respond to that. And as you can see, we've got a pre-trial hearing on the 27th of February, and then the actual trial is scheduled for the 9th of March at Cumbrian Magistrates Court. So we will wait and see the outcome of that, and that will be reported to the licensing committee at the next meeting, which will be May, May now, won't it? There's another investigation. Scrap metal dealer that refused to produce the records. I've mentioned that now. That one is now with the legal team to allay information to serve summonses. 586. You can see we got another investigation for a driver refusing to drive from the taxi rank in Cumbrian because the passenger didn't know the postcode. He couldn't put it in. He chucked him out of the vehicle and took him to another taxi. But he didn't just do it once. He did it twice, because we set him up and we put a test purchaser in. He did the same to us as a test purchase. The prosecution file will be finished next week, and that will be going forward for refusing to drive is actually an offence under the Town Police Clauses Act for a hackney carriage. Not a private hire vehicle, but a hackney carriage off the rank. They must take you, unless there are reasonable circumstances. I mean, if someone is being sick all over the place and you don't want someone being sick in your taxi, that's a reasonable, or someone's being drunk and violent and you don't want them in your taxi, that's reasonable. But not knowing where you're going as a taxi driver is actually not a very, very good, is it? The fact that he does most of his work in Bristol probably explains why. He's one of our Bristol drivers. That's everything with regards to prosecutions and appeals. As you can see, there's an awful lot going on at the moment, which is making it very difficult for us to deal with other stuff. I will announce it here because I've had permission to do so, but Claire McGrath, one of our licensing officers, if you're not already aware, is about to go off on 6 months maternity leave within the next couple of weeks. And for the last few weeks, she hasn't been going out of the office. So as you imagine, all the work is now down to Simone Potter-Reid and myself. Anything proactive. It does put a lot of extra pressure on the team, especially as we lost one of our administrators recently, which I've reported, because I'm going into the performance now. We'll be running through the summer now with a licensing team of 3, 1 administrator, 1 officer, and myself as team leader, who will be dropping back and doing mainly officer role. It's inevitable through the period. So Claire isn't due to return until November-ish. So this is right the way through now until Christmas, really. So licensing team performance, I don't really need to go into everything and all the complex investigations. I've explained that in the report. But there is no way. We're going to keep the figures there because it gives us a benchmark. So even next year, we've kept the same achievement targets as a benchmark. But we're not going all out to try and achieve them, because it gives us an idea of where we're. If we change the figures, it doesn't show us how we're dropping off, and so we've decided to keep them as they are. So we're not working to try to fail, but it's going to be impossible for us to do anything more, especially with all of this coming up. And there are other prosecutions in the pipeline as well, which we are working on now. So it has become, it's just one of those things, it's become very, very busy. As you can see, I've talked about risk rated. What I'm doing now with inspections, I'm not saying we're not doing inspections. What I'm saying is if we're going to do them, they've got to be a good reason for doing them. To be fair, that falls in line with government policy anyway, with regards to inspection and council officers going into businesses. So it's not necessarily against government policy. That's national government policy. I try to separate the Welsh government and the UK government. So it is something which doesn't go against their policy and their regulators' code anyway. So what we do is where there is a need, we will go in. Where there is a problem, we will go in. Where I identify there are risks, i.e. with taxi vehicles, licensed vehicles, we will do whatever we can. But it will be done where we're going to get results, not just going down and making appointments for them to come and see us. Because that doesn't work. We don't get results. With the licensed premises, the pubs, etc., where there are problems there, we will intervene and we will deal with it proactively. Scrap metal is another one that we have issues with. That's not there is a lot of non-compliance in scrap metal. There are issues coming up all the time with some of these dealers committing thefts, etc. We've got to deal with it. They are our priorities. People make complaints. They expect to be dealt with. If a member of the public complains, they expect to have their complaint dealt with. We will deal with that. So we're not pulling. We've just got to prioritise as opposed to do everything, which is nice to do, but it's not. It is just unachievable anymore. So that's where we are on that. The team report is at Appendix D, and you can see what we have actually done. That's everything off of the actual report, but I've got one more thing which I just want to mention, which I was asked to put on the agenda, but it was my fault. I didn't actually get it put on there. From Councillor Mills, is regarding the child exploitation with regards to taxi drivers. It's quite a big issue nationally now, and I know, Councillor Mills, you're sitting on a committee which is looking at that in particular, aren't you? Do you want to just explain your bit for us?
Yeah, I expect members know that I chair the Healthier Community Overview and Scrutiny Committee, and we recently scrutinised child sexual exploitation in Torfaen. And on reading lots of reports and having police come to the committee and explain the system, what is quite clear all over the country and also in South Wales, when children are exploited, they are actually normally moved around by taxis. The perpetrators tend not to use their cars for obvious reasons because the cars can be recognised, so they tend to move children around by taxis. So one of the recommendations was that child sexual exploitation training of more staff in public places was therefore required, and they gave examples of taxi drivers, door staff, hotel staff, to make sure that they were aware, and if they were suspicious, who to report it to. So I just wanted to ensure that our taxi drivers were actually receiving that training as such.
At the moment, no, they're not, as I'm not sure exactly what the training is that they're expected to receive. What I will say is that there is a letter there. I think you may all have it in front of you. If not, there are copies there with Karen. It's a letter that we received back in November from Baroness Kramer from the Department of Transport, just to reiterate to licensing authorities the powers we have. Now, personally, and I think that those of you who have sat on panels here know that we are very proactive in this role with regards to dealing with anybody who has any form of sexual interference or sexual contact or sexual procurement of any female, let alone children. So we are very proactive in that way, and we deal with everything in a very serious manner. As far as training for taxi drivers, etc., is concerned, I'm not aware of what exactly. We haven't been given any information about what that training should involve, etc. What I will have to do now is I will have to contact the police and say, well, what exactly do you want them told? Because I can put it in a newsletter, I can put it in a letter, I can call meetings, and the trouble is when I call a meeting, they just want to shout at me about other things. They don't want to listen to what I've got to tell them. So that is not necessarily the best way of actually going about giving the information out. The newsletters we do, that newsletter there had a big effect because we're now getting taxi drivers ringing us all the time about private hire vehicles parking on in different places. And the issues that we get, if we got it in writing like that, it does help us. It helps us when we go to court as well. So it is something that is obviously a concern. And out of interest as well, I'm going to a conference on the 31st of March up at Local Government House, which is to do with taxi licensing, and in particular the child exploitation part is going to be a big part of that area. The issue we've got, the problem we've got at the moment is the government have got a double agenda here, and it's confusing. Because one agenda is the deregulation bill. We're waiting, in April we're expecting what they call the deregulation bill. As part of the national government agenda has been to deregulate and get rid of regulations that are hampering businesses, which, laudable, yes. But what they're doing is they're having difficulty finding the legislation that they want to get rid of. And what they're doing is watering down taxi legislation. For instance, one of the things in this deregulation bill is opposed to us doing a check every year when they apply for their licence. So they won't be doing a yearly licence, they're going to be doing a 3-yearly licence. So we'll only see them once every 3 years. Operators, 5 years. This is what they're saying. Now, this is going to have an effect in a number of ways with regards to the council, because if this comes in this year, during the year, say, April to April, when all of our taxi drivers renew, they're all going to renew in one lump. We're going to get all of our renewals in 1 year, and then we're going to get 2 years with no renewals. Also, no income. So our income is now spread over, all coming in one lump. And it's going to be, so this is going to cause us a lot of problems. There's a lot of issues. They've managed to take out some of the issues that were in there by lobbying and everything else, but some of them they're keeping in because they've got an agenda. They've got a manifesto to say that they've achieved. And they are working hell-bent to get this deregulation bill through to take away a lot of regulation. They're going to deregulate a lot of the temporary event notices. For instance, you can have a temporary event notice after April, if once it's passed, not for 500 people, but for 2,000 people. That means you can have a rave on a temporary event notice. Can you imagine it? They're just taking out this deregulation is, I think is laudable. If you're running a business, there are some regulations which are big red tape and maybe in the way, but they don't seem to be getting rid of those. They're getting rid of the stuff which is actually a public safety or a public nuisance, that's what it's controlling. So I have my own issues on this, but we can only work within the legislation framework that we've got. They had a Law Commission review on taxi and private hire licensing, which produced a draft bill for a complete new regulation to get rid of the 1847 Horse and Cart Act, as they call it, because all taxis out there are under the 1847 Town Police Clauses Act. And that was written when there were no engines. It was horses and carts. They rewrote it, made a reasonably good job of it. We weren't happy with all of it, but then you never will be. But they actually brought it up to date. They brought it into the mobile phone world, at least, which is what is needed. But the Department of Transport have decided we're going to do little bits and pieces of it piecemeal, not take it all in. So all the time we're being hampered. So we've still got 1847 legislation, and even the private hire vehicles, which are on the 1976 legislation. I think most of us here can remember 1976, as we were driving at that time. Cars are totally different. Roads are totally different. Communication is totally different. We're living in a different era. We need 21st century legislation. Yeah. No potholes, was that? Yeah. Yeah. A number of things were different then. Cost of petrol, for one thing, about 10 bob a gallon. Yeah, but so anyway, there is a lot going on which is not helping us, to be fair. Now, like I say, as far as taxi driver training is concerned, if you can give me the contact of the police officer, I will contact them and find out exactly what they want taxi drivers to know, and then I will then do something about it. But up until now, no one's really contacted us to ask us to do anything.
Yeah, Karen's got the contact.
Oh, that's lovely. Thank you. Yeah. Okay. That's as far as I can tell you at the moment. But what I do know, there are things happening. We are aware of the issues because, of course, the Doncaster case is the thing which has highlighted this. And, of course, we are aware from historical things that we've done here in the licensing panel that there was, and potentially still is, a ring down in Newport who are procuring females, and a lot of those are licensed taxi drivers. Some of them were licensed with us until we took their licences away. So we are quite proactive on this once we get the information. Our difficulty is getting the information, which is always the case.
Any other questions from any member of the panel to Steve? No. If not, we'll go on to on to 10 and 10.1 recommendations. The first recommendation is that the committee note and comment on the contents of the report. 2, that the committee note the delegated decisions. 3, that the committee approve the commencement of consultation of the Licensing Act 2003 policy, which is attached at Appendix A, and that the committee note the activity report of the second quarter of 2014-15. Does someone move it? Thank you. That's moved. And just before we finish, I would like to thank Steve and the licensing team, because they are grossly understaffed, and the amount of work that they do, I think, is absolutely tremendous, for the people in Torvine. Thank you, Steve. With that, could I close and thank you all for attending this morning's meeting? Thank you.